The red and blue lights painted harsh shadows across our driveway as two police cruisers pulled up to our house. Through the living room window, I watched Brenda Harrington, our HOA president, standing on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, pointing dramatically at my wife, Sarah, as she unloaded another box from our car. The smug satisfaction on Brenda's face made my blood boil. But I knew better than to lose my cool. Sarah set down the box she was carrying and reached into her back pocket. The moment she pulled out her military ID and showed it to the officers, Brenda's triumphant expression melted away like ice cream on hot pavement. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her pearl necklace, and I could see her mouth forming a small "oh" of surprise as the reality of her mistake began to dawn on her. Just 5 days earlier, Sarah and I had been excited about our new beginning in Pine Valley Estates. After 3 years of military housing and deployments, we'd finally saved enough for a down payment on this beautiful colonial home. Sarah had just received her new assignment at Fort Harrison, only 20 minutes away, which meant we could finally put down roots. As we pulled into the driveway that first day, I noticed our neighbor watching from her window. I waved cheerfully, thinking nothing of it. Sarah, still in her dress uniform from her welcome ceremony at the base, stepped out of the car and stretched after the long drive. The curtains next door twitched closed immediately. That evening, as we unpacked dishes in the kitchen, the doorbell rang. A woman in her 50s stood on our porch, clipboard in hand, and a practiced smile on her face. She wore a blazer despite the warm weather, and her hair was styled in what I can only describe as an aggressive bob. She introduced herself as Brenda Harrington, HOA president and our next-door neighbor. Her eyes swept over me approvingly before landing on Sarah, who had just emerged from the kitchen wearing her SCU uniform pants and a tank top. The smile faltered for just a moment before Brenda launched into a rehearsed speech about community standards, proper lawn maintenance schedules, and approved mailbox colors. She handed me a thick packet of HOA rules, making a point to place it directly in my hands while completely ignoring Sarah. The next morning, I headed to work while Sarah took a few days of leave to get us settled. She was outside directing the moving company when Brenda appeared with a tape measure. Without asking permission, she began measuring the distance from our moving truck to the curb, muttering about vehicular regulations. Sarah politely asked if there was a problem and Brenda replied in a syrupy sweet voice that she just wanted to make sure everything was up to code. She then produced a camera and began taking photos of our lawn, claiming she needed to document its current condition for HOA records. Over the next few days, Brenda's behavior grew increasingly strange. Every time Sarah left for work in her uniform or came home to grab lunch, I'd catch Brenda peering through her blinds. When Sarah worked in the front yard planting flowers, Brenda would suddenly appear to water plants that clearly didn't need watering. She would position herself where she could watch Sarah's every move, occasionally taking notes on her ever-present clipboard. The passive-aggressive comments started small. She asked Sarah if she was the housekeeper when she saw her carrying cleaning supplies from the car. She inquired whether Sarah was authorized to park in our own driveway. When Sarah was power washing our deck, Brenda appeared to inform her that such activities required HOA approval and should only be done between certain hours, even though it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. On day 3, things took a more sinister turn. I came home to find Sarah frustrated and angry, a rare state for my usually calm wife. Brenda had confronted her while she was checking our mail, demanding to know who had given her permission to access the mailbox. When Sarah explained that she lived here, Brenda had laughed dismissively and said she found that hard to believe. She insisted that I must be the sole homeowner and that Sarah needed written authorization from me to collect mail. Sarah had shown incredible restraint by simply walking away, but I could see how much the interaction had bothered her. Things escalated on day 4 when Brenda cornered Sarah at the community mailbox. I watched from our front window as Brenda gestured wildly, her voice carrying across the street. She was demanding to see proof that Sarah actually lived in our house. From what I could hear, Brenda was insisting that she had never seen Sarah's name on any of the HOA paperwork and therefore had reasonable suspicion that she was trespassing. Sarah, ever the professional, simply smiled and walked away, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. That night, Sarah told me Brenda had accused her of being an unauthorized occupant and threatened to involve the authorities if she didn't provide proper documentation. She also mentioned that Brenda had made several comments about how the neighborhood had certain standards to maintain and how important it was that all residents fit in properly. I wanted to march over there and give Brenda a piece of my mind, but Sarah stopped me. She had dealt with worse during her deployments and wasn't about to let a suburban busybody get under her skin. Instead, we decided to document everything. Sarah started keeping a log of every interaction, and I installed a security camera that covered our front yard and driveway. Little did we know how soon we'd need that footage. The next morning, I left early for a meeting while Sarah enjoyed a rare day off. She decided to finish unpacking the garage, working with the door open to let in the spring air. She told me later that Brenda had walked by several times, slowing down each time to peer into our garage. On her fourth pass, she stopped and took multiple photos with her phone. Sarah asked her what she was doing, and Brenda claimed she was documenting a potential HOA violation regarding storage of military equipment in residential areas. Sarah patiently explained that her rucksack and duty bags were personal property, but Brenda just smirked and said she'd let the board decide. Around 10 a.m., I received a frantic text from Sarah saying the police were at our house. My heart dropped as I read her message. I excused myself from the meeting, my hands shaking as I gathered my things. My colleague asked if everything was okay, and I barely managed to mumble something about a family emergency. I broke every speed limit racing home, my mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. What had Brenda done? As I turned onto our street, I saw the scene that would become burned into my memory. 2 police cars with their lights still flashing. Brenda standing triumphantly on the sidewalk with her arms crossed and my wife calmly talking to 2 officers while gesturing toward our house. I parked hastily and jogged over, catching the tail end of the conversation. The older officer, a veteran himself, judging by his bearing, was examining Sarah's military ID with careful attention. His younger partner stood nearby, notepad in hand, looking increasingly uncomfortable. The senior officer handed the ID back to Sarah with a slight nod and a quietly spoken, "Thank you for your service." He then turned to face Brenda, whose confident posture was beginning to wilt. The officer's voice was measured but firm as he asked her to explain exactly what law she believed was being broken. Brenda stammered something about unauthorized residence and maintaining property values, but her words sounded hollow even to her own ears. She tried to rally, mentioning something about suspicious behavior and unusual schedules, but the officer cut her off with a raised hand. The younger officer pulled out his notepad and began asking Brenda pointed questions. Did she have any actual evidence of wrongdoing? Had she attempted to verify her assumptions before calling 911? Did she understand that military families have the same rights as any other homeowners? Did she realize that making false reports based on someone's appearance or occupation could be considered a form of harassment? With each question, Brenda seemed to shrink a little more. She tried to backpedal, claiming she was just being a concerned neighbor looking out for the community's safety. She mentioned that she had never seen Sarah's name on the deed and that she had a responsibility as HOA president to investigate suspicious activity. The senior officer's expression hardened at this. He asked Brenda if she had actually checked the deed or if she was making assumptions. When she admitted she hadn't verified anything officially, he asked why she felt entitled to demand documentation from a resident in their own home. Brenda tried to invoke her HOA authority, but the officer quickly informed her that HOA rules don't supersede actual law and she had no legal right to demand proof of residency from anyone. He added that calling the police for a non-emergency situation based solely on discriminatory assumptions was a misuse of resources. What happened next was perhaps the most satisfying moment of my life. The senior officer informed Brenda that filing false reports and misusing emergency services was a serious offense. He explained that her actions could be considered harassment, especially given the pattern of behavior we described. He asked Sarah if she wanted to press charges, and I saw Brenda's face go pale. Sarah graciously declined, but said she was documenting everything for potential civil action. The officer wrote up a formal warning, his pen scratching loudly in the sudden silence. He made Brenda read it aloud, which included an acknowledgement that she had called the police without valid cause and had potentially engaged in discriminatory behavior. Sarah, who had remained calm throughout the entire ordeal, finally spoke up. She told the officers about the pattern of harassment, the constant surveillance, the photos, and the unfounded accusations. She mentioned how Brenda had questioned her right to check her own mail and had made numerous comments suggesting she didn't belong in the neighborhood. The younger officer took detailed notes while Brenda tried unsuccessfully to interrupt. When Sarah mentioned that she was considering filing a formal complaint with both the HOA board and potentially pursuing legal action for harassment and discrimination, Brenda's complexion went from red to ghostly white. She started to protest that she had never mentioned race or anything discriminatory. But the senior officer pointed out that discrimination can take many forms, including targeting someone based on assumptions about their occupation or socioeconomic status. After the officers handed Brenda her warning and drove away, she stood frozen on the sidewalk for a full minute. Sarah and I watched from our driveway as she finally turned and walked back to her house, her usual confident strut replaced by a defeated shuffle. Her husband, who had appeared on their porch during the commotion, quickly ushered her inside. The woman, who had terrorized our neighborhood with petty violations and power trips, had finally met her match. The next morning, I noticed the neighborhood watch captain sign had disappeared from her yard and the HOA president parking sign in front of her house had been removed. Word of the incident spread through Pine Valley estates like wildfire. Our doorbell rang constantly over the next few days as neighbors stopped by to welcome us properly and share their own horror stories about Brenda. We learned that she had cited an elderly couple for having their garbage cans visible from the street for 10 minutes too long, fined a single mother for chalk drawings on her own driveway, and tried to force a disabled veteran to remove his wheelchair ramp because it wasn't an approved HOA modification. Each story was worse than the last, painting a picture of a woman drunk on the tiny amount of power her position afforded her. Within a week, a special HOA meeting was called. The community room was packed as resident after resident stood up to voice their complaints about Brenda's behavior. A young couple shared how she had measured their grass with a ruler and fined them when it was 4 inches too tall. A retired teacher explained how Brenda had demanded she remove bird feeders that had been in her yard for 20 years. Sarah and I attended but didn't need to say a word. The momentum had already shifted. When the vote was called, Brenda was removed from her position as HOA president by an overwhelming majority. Only 2 people voted for her to stay, and I suspected one of them was Brenda herself. The final blow came when the HOA board, now free from Brenda's influence, voted to fine her $5,000 for misuse of her position in creating a hostile environment for residents. Her lawyer argued unsuccessfully that she had been acting in good faith to protect property values. The judge disagreed, noting that her pattern of behavior suggested deliberate harassment and an abuse of power. He also mentioned that her targeting of a military service member was particularly egregious. As the gavel came down, finalizing the fine and issuing a restraining order preventing her from any HOA involvement for 5 years, Brenda's face crumpled in defeat, tears streaming down her cheeks as she realized her reign of terror had finally ended.